Alrighty, so yesterday, 4/16/2023, Battlestate Games decided to reduce the vertical recoil of all weapons by 15%. This is a massive buff to all weapons. Some weapons, because they have a higher base recoil, have been buffed a bit more than others, since it is a percentage-based buff. But what does this mean for us as players? That means the HK416 is back, baby! Wait, the recoil patch was on 416, and the HK416 is better? Did they do this on purpose? Was this planned? Do the devs know? So all of the weapons were buffed, but you're going to feel it the most in weapons that have a high fire rate. So for example, the HK416, it has a fire rate of 850. You're going to feel the buff a lot more on the HK than you would, for example, like the Scar L, which has a fire rate of 650. Also, what that means is, even though both weapons were buffed, the buff to the HK is a larger buff, and the buff to the Scar L is a smaller buff, because it has a slower fire rate and it had good recoil to begin with. The HK has a much higher fire rate, and it has more recoil, so because of that, it's affected more by this buff. This changes the balance of the weapons in relation to each other a lot. So, for example, with my 556 tier list, I put the HK in B tier. I would say now it is A tier. And I put the Scar L in A tier because its recoil was very good to control because of the low fire rate. However, now that vertical recoil has been reduced by 15%, I would put the Scar L in B tier because if both weapons' recoil is extremely controllable, then the weapon that shoots faster is clearly the better option. One important thing to understand about this change is that it only affects vertical recoil. So weapons with high horizontal recoil, for example the AUG A1, will still have very horrible horizontal recoil, making the weapon still unusable. So this change only affected vertical recoil. And I think that's mainly where my problem with this change comes in, because I feel like in terms of an FPS experience, vertical recoil is fun to control, and horizontal recoil is frustrating because it's uncontrollable. I feel like with them removing vertical recoil, they're removing an element of player skill, and also an element of fun from the way the weapons feel. Typically speaking, I am usually not a fan of any change that I feel removes player skill. It's always disappointing to me when a game makes changes to lower the skill ceiling as opposed to raising the skill ceiling. So for me, I like games that have an infinite skill ceiling and that you can always improve in, and there's always like a level of, there's always an unreachable level of skill. I feel like the variability in spray between someone who's really good, someone who's average, and someone who's new to the game is too small of a difference now, which does fit the RPG elements of this game, meaning that it's more about the progression of your character and less of your individual skill. However, from an FPS perspective, this is very demoralizing to see that player skill is less impactful in the way that the game will be played. So what I think this will mean largely overall for the game is that it will be harder to survive ambushes. Essentially meaning that the gameplay will basically boil down to I saw you first, or oh dang, you saw me first. And I thought the game was going to be moving away from this philosophy because earlier in the wipe they made a change that higher end ammos are more difficult to obtain, meaning increase the survivability for all players, because when you encounter another player, they don't instantly destroy you with the best ammo in the game. Maybe you take a couple more hits, which gives you a chance to reposition or flee, increasing the survivability of players, and making PvP a lot more interesting and less of a just punishing thing, but more of an interactive experience between the two players. The reason why I talk about that is because even with less effective ammos, if you land more hits more easily, the ineffective ammos become like effective ammos because you're, instead of missing, you're connecting hits. This change reduces players' survivability in situations where they get ambushed. TLDR, at the moment, I think this is a bad change, which is interesting because it seems like largely the community is very happy about this change. Earlier this wipe, when they changed the camera recoil and also the weapon recoil, I thought to myself, this was unnecessary, but it's okay, I'll welcome it and we'll see how it is, and it felt pretty nice. This change, I think, is absolutely not necessary, and I'm actually not really in favor of it. Does that mean I'm going to write a tweet longer and say the devs are dumb and what are they doing with this game? No, absolutely not. I'm gonna play the game, I'm gonna have a lot of fun, and it's going to be a good time. Maybe with more raids, I'll be like, alright, this reminds me of the Tarkov that it was when I first started playing. Because overall, this wipe, they've been making a lot of really good changes to the game, which has done a great job in making the game more fun to play. However, at the moment, with certain guns and this change, I think it is absolutely broken and it does not make sense. I have stated before, and I guess I will again right now, that the way you fix recoil in this game is on a gun-to-gun basis, not in terms of like a general blanket fix. I said this when they were doing the camera recoil changes. I said, okay, this is great, but some weapons are fine and other weapons need help. Like, for example, the HK416 and the SA58. These are weapons that need help. Weapons that did not need help are like the AK101, the RD704, the M4A1, and the MP7. These weapons did not need help, and now with the 15% vertical recoil change, I'd say some of these weapons are so good that it's busted. Like, the RD704 was amazing prior to this change. Now, it's even better. It's an incredible gun right now in the state of the game. Anyways, those are my thoughts with them reducing the vertical recoil of all guns by 15%. All that's left now is we go play the game some more and try and have some fun. So get out there and have some fun.